This short video is going to show you how to graph basic functions on your graphing calculator. The first thing you always want to do is make sure your calculator is ready to be used for graphing. And what I mean by that is if you're in your home screen, make sure everything's cleared out of here. If you click on your y equals screen, make sure there's nothing in here as well. If there is, then go ahead and click clear and get rid of anything that might be there. And then the last thing you always want to do is do a zoom 6 on your calculator. What that does is it's going to put it in a standard 10 by 10 window. So in case you did some zooming in or zooming out the last time you used your grapher, this will get you set back to a standard window. Another thing on your y equals screen is make sure none of your plots are highlighted. If for some reason this was plotted and it's highlighted, see how my graph, you don't even have to hit graph, you're going to get an error. So all you have to do, if any of those are highlighted, just go up there with your up arrow, land on the one that's highlighted, hit enter, and it will unhighlight it. That way it's ready to be used for graphing. The plots work with the statistical part of a graphing calculator, and we're not going to do that in this class. So the first equation I want to graph is x plus 5. So y equals x plus 5. My variable key is to the right of the green button. Notice that the only types of equations that the grapher will accept are the ones that are in y equals. So if you have an equation that is not in y equals, you will need to manipulate it so that it is in y equals. Then you simply hit graph, and there's your graph. On my screen, I can see the equation, I can see the graph, and I can see a table. If you want to go back to your equation, you just hit the y equals. If you want to go back to the graph, you hit graph. If you want to see this table, click second table. This table feature is nice because if your graph is slightly off and you don't know why, you can go to the table feature and check your ordered pairs compared to the table that is here. These are ordered pairs. And you can scroll through them and make sure that yours match up. And this is a good way to find your mistakes. So if you had put in 6 and got 9, then you're like, oh, it looks like I should have got 11. So it's a good way to check your work. Okay, let's try one that has a fraction in it. So I'm going to graph y equals 1/4 x minus 8. Notice when I did my fraction, I used my division, also parentheses. And if you want to know how I got that on my screen, here are my keystrokes over here to the right. And then hit graph. And there's my graph towards the bottom, kind of flat, a little bit flatter than the last line. You can see my table, my equation, my table, and my graph. Okay, now let's look at x squared plus 3. Now we're throwing in a squared into the equation, and you'll see how that affects the graph here in a minute. The squared is used so much in algebra that it has its very own key on the grapher. So I hit my variable key, and then I hit the squared key, and then plus 3. Hit graph, and I get kind of this curve shape up here. Now I'm going to show you something real quick. If I just go over and I just change this from a plus to a minus, look how that affects my graph. It just moves it down. Anyway, I have a U-shaped here, and you can see my equation, you can see my table, and you can see my graph. Again, if your graph is off and doesn't quite match the one in your grapher because you're trying to check your work, check the table feature and see which one of your ordered pairs you're off. Most of the time it's because you forgot to square a negative. One other type that you're going to be asked to graph in the graphing calculator or in your assignment might deal with absolute value. So where is absolute value on the graphing calculator, or how do you graph absolute values? Well, it's hidden in a special place under the math button. So if you click math, you don't see it here. Now you see that fraction, which we're used to using. But if you arrow right to the one to get a different menu, ABS, that stands for absolute value. So that's what you want. Now I want the absolute value of x minus 5 is what I'm graphing. and I'm going to use that closed parenthesis. Now you know with absolute values when we write them it's just vertical lines, but the graphing calculator doesn't have that feature. So this will graph the absolute value of x minus 5. Now if I hit graph, there's my graph. So it's like it was a straight line until it hit here and then it bends. The reason for that is absolute values, distance from 0, so would we have a negative distance? Probably not. So that's why it hits the 0 and it bounces back up. So here's your absolute value. Again, if you generated some ordered pairs, which you probably did, I encourage you to check the table feature. If your graph looks like this one, then you were correct. If it's off, then you might look at the table and see which ordered pair you need to fix.